Hi all and welcome to the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name's Thomas Williams. Right, let's get down to business. We've got a packed show, chunks of intel, the usual op-ed pieces, and a much slimmed down Q&A. More about that later. Oh dear. This is the first of what is proposed to be 7 shows in the next 14 days. We have this one, and then the next one will be on OYM on Sunday, which will be a 3-hour show with Randy Morgans and also Kim. So look forward to that. And then we've got the normal, if there's anything normal about a THI show, on the 27th, and then on the Saturday and Sunday, which I think is the 29th and 30th, we will have a full end of year review. And we've been tentatively posted in for a new show. Was a Ground Command Crew on the 2nd of January, and then we're back to the normal show on the 3rd, so we'll see. Right, let's get into, you can listen live on Spreaker.com/user 8955881, or you can also listen live on thinkdifferent.thepeoplesclub.org. Please go and listen to the must listen to shows. There's now a search section for, you can put in key names and it brings up all the shows. So it's all there for you on Think Different. Articles on self-empowerment, shielding, which is important. We have a new grounding and centering document in the works that will be added shortly as well. We have the Facebook page, Truth, Honour and Integrity, and the Facebook social media alternative at MeWe.com. If you can't find us on MeWe, which is also Truth, Honour and Integrity, you can send an email for the show or comments or questions to truth.honour.and.integrity@gmail.com. The People's Club, the foundation, which once funded, will be launched, and all proposals, please send them to thepeoplesclub.org, not to the Truth, Honour and Integrity@gmail, please. And Patreon, for those who wish to support me and this show, it's patreon.com/TommyW/memberships. News. Let's get into some news. Some interesting news going on. Some of it will be covered in the intel. There's a lot going on. And tomorrow could be bedlam. I will warn you of that. Could be a nice bedlam, but I expect it. The clowns are getting a bit desperate. Anyway, a federal judge in Texas last Friday has thrown the health coverage of some 20 million Americans into limbo by ruling Obamacare must be scrapped because Congress struck the penalty for failing to obtain insurance coverage. And the invalidation of the landmark 2010 law is certain to send shockwaves through the US health system. I wish it would. After a midterm election seen in part to rebuke to Republican efforts to tear down Obamacare, the decision will be immediately appealed, said a California Attorney General Xavier Becerra, who led a group of blue states in intervening to defend the law. Now, ultimately, we could become the 3rd major Obamacare case to be taken up by the Supreme Court, which has twice voted to uphold the law. Maybe not going forward. District Court Judge Reed O'Connor, who was a George W. Bush appointee in Fort Worth, Texas, issued the decision which gutted the law in response to a lawsuit from 20 conservative-led states that sought to have the Affordable Care Act tossed out. And they had successfully argued that the mandate penalty was a critical linchpin of the law, and without it, the entire framework is rendered unconstitutional indeed. Now, the decision came a little more than 24 hours before the sign-up period for the 2019 Obamacare coverage, which was set to close. President Trump also acted on Friday and abruptly named Mick Mulvaney, the current director of the Office of Management and Budget, as acting White House Chief of Staff. Tick-tock, we did one. Mulvaney replaces John F. Kelly, a retired four-star Marine Corps general who failed to impose discipline on a chaotic West Wing and was ousted last week by Trump after the president grew tired of Kelly's restrictive management. Now, there has been a number of mixed messages. You're going to see a lot of mixed messages in the Portal People news. I would suggest ignore most of it, but that's just me. But the length of Mulvaney's tenure was not decided, and whether that post would be permanent, with aides saying Trump wanted to preserve flexibility. And Mulvaney's tentative appointment caps for now at least Trump's week-long search for a third chief of staff in 2 years, after the president's first choice turned down the job and other candidates removed themselves from consideration. Smart move, I would say, at this point. Also leaving, US Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke is leaving his post at the end of the year, and Trump says in the latest high-profile departure, there has been more. We'll cover that shortly. In a tweet, Trump thanked Mr. Zinke for his services, saying he'd achieved much in his tenure and he would appoint a new Interior Secretary next week. Now, Mr. Zinke is an ex-Navy SEAL and a former Montana congressman, but has been embroiled in allegations of ethic violations, fraud and corruption again. They include a land deal in Montana involving Mr. Zinke and the chairman of Oilfield Services, Halliburton. Big hint. The Interior Department oversees federal land, including national parks such as Yosemite and Yellowstone. And Mr. Zinke has faced scrutiny over expensive trips to US park helicopters and also on private jets. And also costly alterations in his department also came in for some criticism, including that 3 sets of double doors in his office were being upgraded at a cost of nearly $139,000 for 3 new doors. Really. All very Halliburton there. But he later said he had negotiated the price down to $75,000. Like that makes much difference. $25,000 per door. It's a bit like the $1,000 toilet seats, isn't it? And yes, he was military. Nigeria's military has revoked its earlier 3-month decision to suspend activities of the UN Children's Agency, UNICEF. And they were operating in the northeast of the country. And the military said this came after extensive deliberations during emergency talks with UNICEF officials. And on Friday, the army had accused the agency of spying for Islamist militants in the region. Yes, they're all involved. Millions of people displaced by the Boko Haram insurgency in the northeast are dependent on humanitarian aid. And the statement came just hours after the military accused the UN agency of spying for the Islamists, and they also stated that the UNICEF staff train and deploy spies who support the insurgents and also their sympathisers. No surprise to listeners of THI. UN, peace. As Kim says, UN like a piece of this and a piece of that. Nothing to do with peacekeeping or looking after children either. We've all heard about that as well. Off to Germany next. Nation states must today be prepared to give up their sovereignty, according to the outgoing, TikToking German Chancellor Angela Merkel, told attendants at an event by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Berlin, on Wednesday, in an orderly fashion, of course, she suggested, but she went so far as to condemn those in her own Christian Democratic, and I've said that deliberately, Union party who think Germany should withdraw from the controversial UN Migration Pact. There were politicians who believed that they could decide when these agreements are no longer valid because they are representing the people. But the people are individuals who are living in a country. They are not a group who define themselves as the German people, she stressed. Really. She has previously accused critics of the UN Global Compact for Safe and Orderly Migration of not being patriotic, because that is not patriotism. Because patriotism is when you include others in German interests and accept win-win situations. It's funny how they changed the word patriotism, isn't it? Which is another word for fascism. When it suits. You know, fascism was everything to do with Germany, and also the discrediting of the Aryan race by using that as a political tool, and now all of a sudden it means include everyone. But she's not alone, as her words echo recent comments made by the French President Emmanuel Macron, who stated in a Remembrance Day speech that patriotism is the exact opposite of nationalism. No, it's not. Because nationalism is treason, according to Mr. Macron. I think he has more pressing concerns, because he's another one on TikTok. Where next? Australia. According to a new policy currently being considered by MPs in Australia, unless you've filled out an official opt-out document, your organs will automatically be donated after you die, according to them anyway. And the changes are supposed to help curb the illegal organ trade. Funny that, because Australia take part in it. Lots of it. Anyway, under the new law, Australians who go overseas to receive an illegal transplant will be criminally prosecuted upon their return to the country, and doctors will be required to report any suspicions they have about patients who might have received an illegal organ donation overseas. And this is all because of an article in the Sunday Telegraph that reported almost 100 Australians had travelled overseas to have black market transplants, even paying up to $250,000 for a kidney transplant in some instances. And they're saying it's all down to a shortage of organ donations. Now, it's to keep that criminal racket going of trafficking. That's what that's about. Maryland Province Jesuits. Next, a Catholic religious order with priests serving throughout the Washington area and across 8 states, released a list on Monday of priests in the order who have been credibly accused of abusing children since the 1950s. The list includes 5 living Jesuits and 3 who left the order, and also 5 who died. You're going to see a lot more of that. Canada next. We're certainly getting about this week. But there's a dire situation going on in Ottawa. about homeless families, and they are making an effort to put them into places, but some of the places they're putting them into really aren't suitable. But more homeless families are set to join the hundreds already living in hotels and motels across Ottawa as demand for appropriate shelter space continues to surge. Now, between 2014 and 2017, the number of chronically homeless families seeking shelter in Ottawa leapt by 143%. Now, in the past year alone, the city has signed agreements with 6 more hotels and motels to house homeless families, traditionally that being a last resort. But with the recent closure of one of the city's 2 dedicated family shelters, the need for shelter space has far outstripped the supply. Now, back in 2016, there might have been about 50 homeless families put up in hotels and motels on any given night. Now there are 230 families, and the city pays about $3,000 per month to put up a single family in a hotel. This year the city has overspent its budget by nearly $6 million to house homeless families, and scores of homeless families like this particular guy in the article spends an average of 9 months in a motel room. I mean, it's better than the street, but surely by now they should have done something. This is not acceptable, according to Councillor Catherine McKenny, the Mayor's newly appointed Housing and Homeless Liaison Officer, and she believes that money would be better spent helping people pay their rent rather than going down this road of putting them in motels. But she also said to get a handle on the problems, the city also needs more dedicated shelter space. And the Director of Housing Services for the city said the problem predictably is funding. There's only a finite set of resources, according to Shelley van Beerskerk. Really, there's only a finite set of resources. So the budget was overspent by $6 million. And yet Canada can afford to spend multi-millions on oil pipelines that we don't really need. Really. Or on military spending that they don't really need either. Where there's a will, there's always a way. Same applies in most other countries. Well, we covered the issue of prisons and a potential solution in a show not too far back. And I'm pleased to see that Congress today gave final approval to a bipartisan legislation which was supported by President Trump that would bring sweeping changes to prison sentencing and the treatment of inmates during incarceration and following their release. Now, the House of Representatives passed the bill 358 to 36 and was overwhelmingly approved by the Senate on Tuesday. Trump is expected to now sign it into law, and it's called the First Step Act, which has apparently been years in the making and represents an easing of tough law and order minimal sentencing requirements that has been imposed on judges that stem from a 1980s drive to clamp down on a illegal drug epidemic in the United States. With about 2.2 million people incarcerated currently in the United States, many of them are serving long prison sentences for non-violent crimes. So this bill has now been passed and Trump will sign off on it. And these changes recognise the fundamental unfairness of a system that imposes lengthy imprisonment that is not based on the facts and circumstances of each offender and each case. Exactly. A charity this week has revealed a secret exchange between former US President George Herbert Walker Bush had with a Filipino boy that he was alleged to have sponsored over a 10-year period. Now, Bush had used a pseudonym, and the boy, who was 7 when the sponsorship started, had no idea who he was. He was operating under the name George Walker. And the boy, Timothy, learned his mentor's identity when he left the scheme at 17 and was stunned. And the charity Compassion International said and released some of the letters that Bush Sr. sent, including one where he says, "I'm an old man, 77 years old, but I love kids." Yes, indeed. "Though I have not met you, I love you already," he wrote. "I live in Texas. I will write from you from time to time. Good luck." If only we didn't know the backstory. Imagine anyone else, male listener, no matter what age, doing that. Isn't that called procurement? Why would they have interest in a Filipino boy? Well, sadly, too many of us who listen to this show and many other shows know the background of these elites and their propensity to like children for various reasons. All about setting them up for future use, sadly. Right, we've gone through the news. Let's get some Q&A out the way. I'm not going to go too far into it because I'm getting a bit frustrated at the levels of Q&A, to be quite honest, and so are many of the members. And maybe some of the ones I pick out will be indicative. And my responses are not to the people who asked the questions. The responses will be general. But all the shows we have done and all the narrative we've put out, archiving the must listen to shows, we've archived all the Kim shows, archived all the transcripts now for the last 18 months. We've set up a search engine for keywords that are all provided for you, the listener, at a great expense of my time, and also Michael Jacquin, who does the website. It's all there for you to grasp and learn should you require to do so. But the lack of understanding, twisting of the narrative, and requesting almost spoon feeding of information brought forward in the questions section recently kind of leaves me aghast in many ways. You know, it's your responsibility to absorb the information in whatever way you choose. But you're not being fair on me, on Michael, or the other listeners with repeat, loaded, misdirected questions week after week. Now, new members I can understand if they've just joined, so it's not directed at them. But I do say most weeks to new members, if you want to find out the essence of THI and the information we put out, go back and listen to the must listen to section on the Think Different site. It's all there. You know, I'm not here to spoon feed anyone. You know, you're not here to follow me. You're here to absorb the information. I'm not here to force you to listen or understand what's being said here either. Again, it's your choice. But surely if you need to know deeper into the narrative, you must absorb the narrative to begin with. Every week now there's a question or several where I've said, I never said that, or that was not what was relayed. And I know it bothers several of our members, as several have approached me with their concerns over it as well. You know, asking personal questions, asking plans and timelines of stuff going on. Since when is A, that relevant, or more importantly B, since when has outing plans or timelines to an opponent we are at war with ever been sensible or constructive? This is the third warning I've given in recent, and it's just got worse. So I'm going to address some questions, but once again, this is not directed at the person who asks the question. First question, or first set of questions. So is the trust a charity with conditions? No, as covered in previous shows. I understand your general description of the trust's purpose, but at what point will the trust be prepared to present a detailed description of the process by which the general purpose of the trust or charity, at least in part, will be achieved? We already have. It's in several shows, all archived. Does not the general good of all people depend upon an individual and comprehensive understanding of the details that would govern the process that potentially would accomplish the general goals of the trust? Yes. But why should the trust lay out an understanding of how we should be, or how we should act, or how we should govern ourselves? Do we really need the trust or anybody else to do that? Does the trust have a detailed plan on how their goals are to be accomplished available for review? And can you email me a copy for my review? We've laid out detailed plans on all the shows, several of them. The question back would be, did you ask the previous trust holders for detailed plans that are available for review? And if so, why not? Why is this trust different? Next questions. By the Man of World holding trusts saying they are trying to give to governments and they are being blocked. That's not what was said. We have sent money to governments. Next question. Governments generally take most of it for the people and give pennies to the people, so why give it to them? As described in several shows, the government will receive 50% and the people will receive 50%. If manna are for real, they need to release funds directly to the people, which is what we've said we're going to do and will do. The government's funding is not being blocked, otherwise the American government would have collapsed last March. And no government employee, which is roughly about 1.2 million, would have been paid since March if it wasn't for the trust. Like I've said repeatedly in the shows, we're being blocked from transferring funds to the people. This person went on to say this can be done, sending money directly to the people, by registering with a non-cabal bank and get a debit card. There is no non-cabal banks. That's why we can't transfer to the people. No. and we should get roughly 3,800 to 6,500 per month out of the trust per person. Really? How do you think that's going to help? Everyone getting $4,000 to $6,500 per month. Do you think many people would decide not to work? I do. Once this is set up, it'll spread like wildfire. It's your entitlement to claim, so everyone will set it up and claim. It belongs all to the people, and I'm hoping with the layout of the foundation that people will use the funds in a better way than we have, or they have. All the money, 4,000 to 6,500, must go to the people, not cut in half by some invented tax or skimmed by the bank or agents or government. Like I said, the 50% is going to the people. You mentioned that giving money directly, $5,000 to the people, is buying them. This is totally wrong. I appreciate your opinion, but I personally think it's wrong. We've got an awful lot of people in society who would only too readily walk away from jobs, particularly the lower paid jobs, with that amount of income. And then what happens? What are you going to spend it on when no one's producing? Who's going to do all the lower paid jobs with $5,000 each per month? We have to think better than that. Gold went missing on 9/11. Does the trust have the gold, or if it's still missing? And if so, does the trust at least know who has the gold and where it may be? The gold was all lifted out and sent to Canada. That's where the 9/11 gold went to. And then it was sequestered and is now in possession of the trust. Much to certain factions' chagrin. I'm a huge animal lover, and it's unclear what happens to our pets. Well, when they pass on, well, they go back to source. That's what happens. With regard to all of the things you mentioned we do on Earth to lower our vibrations, hate, negativity, drugs and alcohol, and that if we were to partake in such things we would not reach the mental plane. But currently my husband and I like to enjoy a few glasses of wine on the weekends. If it is true we can't reach the mental plane, even with a small consumption, we will move towards stopping it altogether. Can you clarify that? Well, everything in moderation is fine. But sadly, too many, as we know, don't do moderation. People are not drinking all week and then going on a binge over the weekend. It's not going to help, is it? You have a couple of glasses of wine. It depends what you mean. Knowing drinkers too well, what you mean by a couple. Couple can mean two, but it could also mean a lot more. There's people who tend to drink, tend to forget how many they've actually drank to begin with. And we all know people like that within our own circle. But a small amount is fine. You know, or a couple of glasses per night, you're pushing it. Because you're just putting consumption on top of consumption. I'm not telling people to quit. People make their own choice. But you are now, what I've done is made you aware of the risks. Was the long period surface wave on from Mayotte, a human telepathic collaboration? That was on the 11th of November. It was at the same time, funny enough, that Kim and I and Randy were doing that show. I think, let's just say it was different that day. Things were different. 2 questions, same thing. Maybe I'll leave that. I don't know if THI is ready to cover SES, Senior Executive Service, run by Anne and good buddy Christine Marcy, and their close relation with OPIC in Mexico and South American countries. THI was ready a long time ago and covered that fairly extensively in past shows, numbers of them. Do you think the plan to make mandatory real ID driving licence programme to be launched on October the 1st, 2020 is a preamble and push for everyone to be chipped? It's always possible if we agree. If we don't, people really need to get together on this and go, we're not having it. What are they going to do? So arrest everyone? One will need a passport to travel domestically if people don't have this real ID. The reality is everything now is chipped. Your clothes, they know who's bought it, where you bought it from. The issue of chipping is more the internal chipping. But don't, your phone's chipped, your credit card's chipped, your debit card's chipped, you name it. They're all chipped. Your passport's chipped. If you look closely, you'll see a raised portion of the passport. This is the way it is now. It can have useful connotations, but too often now it's not. It's all about what we're prepared to put up with. But if they're asking for live chipping, then we really would be stupid to go down that path. That's your virtual reality world. Can we focus our minds on implants, nanobots and dissolve them, or is that beyond our control? Yes, we can. Are the feds planning FEMA camps in barges for the population? No, it's not 2014. We're in 2018 and that's just not happening. How did you meet Kim from Manuel Holden Trust? Did she contact you and did she stumble across THI first? All personal questions, none of them relevant, none of them have any value, and I'm not prepared to answer certain questions. Who is the council you refer to, and what? The council's been referred to in several shows and is in several of the archived shows. It's the Galactic Council. I know this person is new, but like I said, these questions are not tailored to the person who asked them. They're to all. But the council's been covered in several shows. It's the Galactic Council that is overseeing what's going on here. They're not here to interfere unless there's an issue with the peace treaty, which so far there isn't. What's all this talk about the Fed IRS being shut down and debt forgiven? They're all in the archives of the recent shows of what we have done with the Fed. If you type in the search engine on Think Different, you will find all the shows relevant for that, and it goes into greater detail. Where is the Social Security check money coming from to pay those retired people? The trust. Did the light come in to make us see the light, or did it come in on its own? Where there's light, there's dark. It's only when there's an imbalance it becomes an issue. Do you know anything about Jared Rand? He speaks of medbeds and new tech and says he's got no connection to the Rand family. I believe Kim knows of him. He'd requested her to be interviewed last year, but she never called in. That's also crap, period. We know exactly who Jared Rand is, and we've covered it extensively in various shows again. And his sole interest has been an internet sensation, with the backing of his Rand family, which he is a part of, and he's not separate to, far from it, because he was on the call with the whole of the Rand family when Kim spoke to them. Oops. With all the money that the Rand family have got, don't you think they would have got the med beds and new tech out by now? That's a question, though. No, Kim didn't ignore them. How many locations does the SSP have in America, or bases? Several. Do we have weapons to counteract against what they used in California fires? Yes, we'd have a lot more if the US military became the American military and dealt with them. Why are so many corporations investing in crypto and blockchain? Because, like said several times in shows, they have nothing left. I know some people struggle with that. Maybe the Intel portion coming up shortly will tell you why. What happens if we die? We go back to source now, which is different to what happened before 2013 and as far back as 78,000 years ago. Salt trap, memory wipe technology is all gone. Does the Matrix exist anymore? Not in my opinion. It's just a resonant frequency because some people are choosing to hold on to it. Are we used as batteries? Yes, we've covered that several times in the recent show, Demons and Magic. All people are being used as batteries here. Not as much now. Who or what is our higher self? You. Is the simple answer. You're not recognizing, by asking that question, you're not recognizing the multi-dimensional aspect of the self. People may say it's separate from you, but in reality it's not. What are we next? How can our soul be trapped in 3D, maybe 4D, when not all our soul is 100% in 3D? I believed that part of our soul spirit descends to 3D, 4D, and the rest stays in higher dimension as our higher self. That is correct. It is a small portion, but it's the spirit that gets trapped. It's not 4D, it's the astral layer, the spirit, not the soul. The soul can be transferred there when an entity takes over a vessel sufficiently. So you can't have two souls in the one body. That's where that issue comes in. With so much fear porn and disinformation out there, what is the hope for humanity as a collective after all the shackles have been broken? That's up to us. We will be around to help should they request it. I just don't think at this point they can be helped too much, and that's just my opinion. A lot of people disagree with it, and that's fine also. They're just not ready. We've all spent many hours of watching people roll their eyes or dismiss us or tell us to F off or something. You're talking crap, you're nuts, you're conspiracy theory, tinfoil hats, etc., etc. When the evidence is all around them, they just choose not to partake. Why should we lower our vibration of trying to teach people who won't listen? It was too late 2 years ago, because as I pointed out in the article I did towards the end of last week's show, how long it's taken listeners of THI to get a grasp and understanding of what's been going on here, whether it be the control system or the lower end Illuminati factions, etc., etc. And some still struggle with it after 2.5 years. Well, what chance have they got? That's why I think disclosure has to continue in the drip-fed fashion, because if you throw it all at them in one go, it's going to tip them over the edge. Literally. We've all had a steady diet of it. And yes, we've had swallowed far too much, in my opinion, while they sat there and chose to ignore it all and left us to sin eat the whole lot. They're going to struggle. As a collective, it's not going to be too pleasant, I have to say that. And for those of you who are observant, it's already not too pleasant, is it not? Many people are seeing people completely lose it. Cabal minions seem to be harvesting adrenochrome on an industrial scale. do they need it to survive or function at a certain level of efficiency? Some of it's to do with life longevity and other boosts to their systems, and some of them get a high off it. Which boggles my mind, but there you go. But those cut off, you've seen some of the evidence of those cut off, how they've aged rapidly. That's part of it. If their supply is cut off, this will make them less potent in their day jobs, less effective at blocking the trust, RV attempts, and organising false flags. Well, you've got a lot of younger people who can carry out those things. As for RV attempts, I think we've all had enough of regurgitated vomit of tomorrow. Tomorrow never arrived, never will either. That's why they're pushing out super notes and cryptos and blockchains and all that rubbish. Next question is to do with, I mentioned about a rescue team of warriors, and maybe they should step in and address the adrenochrome. Why can't the people already in here address it? Would be my answer. Why is it always somebody else has to come in and fix things? You've seen what happens with people power even in the past. You ready, Dave? 2 weeks. Look what happened in France, Sweden. And it's spreading globally. We have to stop looking for external things to fix things for us, like asking for the council or the UPU to come in and arrest Hillary or Kissinger or Bush or whoever. That's asking for outside parenting, like children. We are more than capable of looking after ourselves, providing we apply ourselves to do that. That's why we had the cabal, whether we like that answer or not. We got the cabal because we asked for them to look after us. Well, bollocks to that. So as you can see, some of those questions are what's frustrating not only me, but a number of members. The information's all there, and it's your responsibility of how much you want to know. Right, let's get into a music break, and we'll be back with some intel. One of the members posted this song this week, and I'm going to reverse it in a different way. You know, it's personal to me this year, but it also is personal to the whole of THI and how I feel about THI members, and also how they feel about THI. Hope you enjoyed the song. Hi all and welcome back. Exactly, we weren't born to follow. We must all lead. And we've done some leading this week. Kim and Manor World Holding Trust. And things have got just a little bit hairy, shall we say. And I expect it to continue, but you will start to see things become a lot clearer here on in. The cryptic element of much of what's been said is now starting to reveal. The hints at certain ones not being the right to go forward with is now being revealed. So the first intel is the clowns spent all weekend trying to come up with various let's continue the old failed programme schemes again. By Monday they'd all crashed and burned. Next item. On Monday, the Federal Reserve rocked up again to the Treasury. Those of you who remember recent shows, remember they rocked up recently and it didn't go down too well. Well, neither did this. They came to the Treasury along with people from the White House, from the Pentagon, from all the agencies, and also the Appropriations Committee, which is essentially run by Congress. And the Federal Reserve then proceeded to produce before all of those groups every bank financial statement, every government department financial status, every agency, Pentagon and military financial status, all of them showing zero liquidity and all of them operating in negative funds. Essentially, all of them are broke, and the Federal Reserve also admitted that they were broke too. Now, their solution they put forward to the Treasury on Monday was, we have no options left now as we are all broke and we have to issue TRNs, Treasury Reserve Notes, or USNs, United States Notes, or we are all doomed, they said. According to them anyway. There is no other option now but to issue TRNs and USNs. And the whole country will collapse unless we, the Federal Reserve, issue those two notes, or either of them. The Treasury and the White House people disagreed, and the Congress operated, which is important. The Appropriations Committee stepped in and said, I'm sorry, but we do have other options, and that option is the Manor World Holding Trust. They have been paying us all and keeping us in jobs and wages since last March. Oops. Oh boy. We now have support of many inside the Congress now as well. The Federal Reserve admitted they were broke to all and sundry on Monday. And a case was made to them as they were leaving of get on board the Trump and Trust train or all of you will sink in your own boats. Oh, to all being a fly on the wall at that meeting. Well, some of us were. The Feds, next item, are still pushing the TRN debt notes. All notes are debts, because they don't have the asset to support a real currency, even fiat ones. Does that in and of itself not state that they can't do an RV? They can't even keep going, never mind do an RV. But there again, I'm talking common sense again, aren't I? Well, notes are like bonds, they're IOUs. But we have the assets to create not IOUs, but an asset-backed currency that's not fiat-based either. and that must be implemented via the Treasury, not the Federal Reserve, the Treasury. Next item. So because the Fed failed in their crash the American economy, mainly due to the trust, I might add, crashing the markets also, their plan was to crash everything and leave all banks, government, agencies and military departments crashed and burned. So the Treasury and the White House then, they thought, had no option but to accept the TRNs or the USNs as the new currency. Well, it was rejected. Their response was, raise the interest rates. It's not going to go down well, trust me. And it hasn't. The reality is they don't have the authority to do so. They are bankrupt and also a defunct organisation after the trust took their licences away and their ability to transfer US dollars inside America. And it's time that official action and actions are taken to get them off our soil once and for all. Now, for those who ask how can they implement it outside of government by raising interest rates, it's simple. For one, the government controls nothing, and I mean nothing. I've said this many times now. And two, the Fed controls all banks, and they implement the interest rates and the Fed policy, the banks. Now this is what this show and Kim have been telling all the top brass here for the last 2 years. They are attempting to financially assassinate this country on behalf of the Rothschilds and then transfer all the wealth over to the East. I can tell you now, many are listening. As for the Federal Reserve and the Rothschilds and their plans, I'm going to use a popular Kim term. I promise you, it's not happening. It hasn't, and it won't. Next item. All investigating committees are now focusing on looking into the Federal Reserve and all their banks for facilitating and using supernotes as a major fraud and corruption event. Over 100 billion of it was circulated, and they all knew what they were doing and also what they were taking part in. Floating liquidity whilst they worked out the TRN or US notes bullshittery. So for the people who doubt they have nothing left, what is called the real currency, there's your hint. Message to Trump and the team. You've been given the tools and the platform to correct all this nonsense. It's time to deliver on it. Delaying will cause many, many more issues. This next piece is a news item, but it's also an intel item. Supporters of President Donald Trump have turned on him, which is people in the Republican Party, of which he's not one, after yet again he denied funding for the border wall. Late on Wednesday, the US Congress approved a spending bill to keep federal agencies open until February. The Republican president was foiled in the Senate by his own party, which refused to grant him any of the $5 billion he wants for the US-Mexico wall. 2 years on, Mr. Trump has been unable to deliver on the central campaign pledge that electrified his rallies, and Trump himself lashed out at Republican leaders on Twitter after speaking by telephone with GOP House Speaker Paul Ryan. And then Trump's press secretary issued a statement saying the president does not want to go further without border security, including money for the wall. All the war rhetoric in the media is total bullshittery and is best ignored. Period. We will give the real updates out in this show when available and safe to do so. The wall is funded. This is a sideshow. And Trump will shut the government down unless they back down. It's all a sideshow. For those of you, and there are many, I think we have somewhere in the region of 70 to 80 times more listeners than we do members of the Facebook and the MeWe pages. This news article in Liberia this week, which is one of several countries we're dealing with currently, but it may put to rest those who have doubts over the trust and its validity, having any assets, or it's just another OPPT style bullshit. Need to listen to this. James Larmin Corboy, a Sierra Leonean national who is said to have held a series of confidential discussions with authorities of both the Ministries of Finance and Development Planning and State for Presidential Affairs that led to his alleged attempt to withdraw $32,835,654 from the account of Manor World Holding Trust, which was going to Liberia. Mr. Corboy was remanded in custody at the Monrovia Central Prison on Monday, and the Manor World Holding Trust to Liberia is a company that holds Liberia's Development and Road Construction Fund. The document obtained by Monrovia City Court about the trust fund claimed that it had in its possession $5.914 billion for redevelopment of Liberia. And it was out of that money that Mr. Corboy allegedly conspired with several other defendants to dupe the government out of roughly $33 million US. The document failed to give further details on ownership of the Manor World Holding Trust. Well, of course, all our members know that. And also alleged Mr. Corboy, shortly after he failed to convince the ministries to withdraw the $33 million, with wicked and criminal intent, organised several discussions, this time with the Ministry of Finance and Development Planning, to also withdraw the $5.914 billion from the Manor World Holding Trust. Then the police arrested them. So the Liberian National Police arrested them at the offices of the Minister Samuel Tweye, where he had gone to hold a meeting with the minister. Oops. The amounts. You know, there's some people who insist that that the Manor World Holding Trust doesn't have any funds. Well, there you have it. $5.914 billion for Liberia alone. That's just one country. There are funds of similar amounts, if not more, for every single country on the planet. That would involve several projects based on what that country wants or needs. We don't decide, or Kim doesn't decide. If it's valid, then the funding is given. It's that simple. The trust holds vast quantities of funds that belong to every country on the planet, including America, and her role is to hand it all back. Once it's all handed back, then her role with trust ends, and we can get on to not fighting and talking with clans like we've spent the last 2 years, or Kim has mainly. So for those who keep saying they've got no website, they've got no policy this and policy that, and it's not real, there you have it. Next intel item. We spoke to GCHQ recently, who are Blue Dragon, along with Anne Hillary, and they were complaining that they had not been paid the $300 million promised by Hillary Clinton for them to bomb Syria and plant fake chemical weapons, which they did. One day later, Trump withdraws all the troops from Syria. Coincidence? We know not. Next item. As we have been bombarded with 2014 stuff again, and collateral accounts, gold accounts, this trust and that trust, names like Marcos, Sukarno, Sino, along with Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, Japan, China, having these treasures, this trust and these vaults. I thought I would give people an update. Mr. Fernando Marcos was a trustee for the trust under the previous regime, and he was also the Pindar for many years, essentially the head of all the dragon groups. And the names that were below him of Sukarno were offshoots or foot soldiers under his command. Others that operated below them in the structure were the Lee family of Singapore, the Chang family, which again were all under the umbrella of Mr. Marcos. And essentially what they were there for was to hand over all the assets, which then went to Mr. Marcos, who then passed them on higher up the chain of command. For the record, Mr. Marcos had 3 layers of chains of command above him, possibly as many as 5. And all those who handed over the assets received remuneration for their assets, whether knowingly or not, that the guy at the top, Marduk, was just harvesting all the assets up. And in return he gave them bits of paper with numbers on that had no intrinsic value to him or the trust, as none of them were essentially asset based. So essentially Mr. Marcos, supported by Sukarno and the Lee family, all partook in the harvesting program for and on behalf of the former trust holder known as Marduk. And yet we have people around the internet talking about how great they were. They were trustees of the trust for Marduk and the harvesting program. Same as Mr. Mandela, another trustee. And essentially this is how those assets all became a part of and in full ownership of by what is known now today as the Manor World Holding Trust. Kim's predecessor harvested everything and in return gave titles and bits of fiat paper in return. That's how it worked. Now they, including the Pindar, all dragon groups, factions, the former Illuminati, covens and parents, largely knew nothing of this plan. Very few were aware, and many of them still don't know to this day. It's one of the things we've been staggered by over the last 2 years, of how little those at the top know. But this is what we've been teaching via this show, and more so via Kim, that they're all following a dead and failed program. It's gone. It's finished. We're not being harvested anymore. And yet these clowns carry on. That harvesting program involved all of us. No matter what title or important position you were fobbed off with, we were all going to end up harvested. The 500 million on the Georgia Guidestones was the first stage. Then when they collected the rest of the bits, they were going to wipe them out as well. Greed and ego are a major problem on this planet, and it has cost us dearly. And very few realise just how close we all came to the ultimate cost of not only losing all our assets, but all of our lives and also the planet. Until a very, very small handful of people stepped in and stopped it. You've no idea. Next item. For the record, all of those vaults in Asia that carried lots more than just gold. Those vaults didn't just contain gold. Were all emptied to a safe, non-recoverable place 4 to 5 years ago, and is now housed inside the trust, which it all belonged to, courtesy of Mr. Marcos and Sukarno et al., and the Lee family and the Chang family. They gave all our assets away. Now what the trust is going to do is it's going to give it all back to all of us, not to descendants of Marcos or connections to Sukarno or the Lee family or the Habsburg family and all the other clowns thinking that they own the trust when they own Jack. It belongs to us all. They've all been given pieces of paper and bits of metal back in return, so they've been paid for it numbers of times. In fact, all those people mentioned actually owe the trust vast quantities of money. The IMF alone owns the trust 189 trillion. Rothschild's 2.2 quadrillion. Second, for the record, all people not of the right frequency attempting to enter or go near the vaults will end in their death, as some in Indonesia and also the Philippines found out recently, and also this week. Final warning. We've all warned you several times, but you didn't listen. But if you wish to kill yourself, then we won't stop you from your own stupidity. Next item. maybe we'll have another high-profile funeral in the near future once the movie ends. Next item. Another 2012 through 2014 programme popped up again this week. Leo Wanter. Mr. Wanter was part of Langley Bush and the Dragon programme to steal all the funds out of the disbanding of the former USSR, and they collected 27 trillion out of it. Now, Mr. Wanter was in part a facilitator for that deal and knew full well what he was involved in, except he got stung from higher up the chain, and they not only cut him out the deal, but they also threw him in jail. It's a case of you play with fire, Mr. Wanter, you sometimes get burnt, and you got burnt badly. But Mr. Wanter now, like other fake humanitarian programs like Jared Rand, Chinese Elders, Procter & Gamble, Thrive Group, Von Wright and the Habsburgs, had no intentions of giving anything to the public whatsoever. None whatsoever. All of them are self-serving and always have been. Only now they no longer can steal the assets that belong to us all. Do they suddenly portray themselves as the saviour? Well, I'm for one are not buying it, and neither is the Kim or the Trust. All of these people got played for fools big time. Heads of industries like oil men, Rockefeller, Rothschilds and the banks. They all played a game of collect all the assets that they thought they had or were in control of. No, they didn't. But these clowns are all trying to claim ownership of assets, but all of them got paid for those assets. That's why Rockefellers and Rothschilds et al. Are all rich. They already been paid, but they think they own the assets. Wrong. Trust us, because it was all being harvested. Marduk cared not for pieces of paper. They were handed out like confetti to people only too willing to trade all of Earth's resources away, including the people. And they went along with it. It's them who created Fiat Money. Like I said, Marduk cares not for bits of paper. Now, Fiat money is a currency that a government has declared to be legal tender, but is not backed by a physical commodity. And yet we've got 86% of all currency exchanges using the US dollar. They're just bits of paper. The value of fiat money is derived from the relationship between supply and demand rather than the value of the material from which the money is made. And fiat money is only value because the government, which are run by at least maybe 2,000 organisations above it, and I'm not joking, maintains that value, or because two parties agree on the said value, which is what the markets do. Now, fiat money, they said, was first introduced as an alternative to commodity-backed money. Yes. So they gave all the hard assets that had value, including people, including souls, I might add, Yes, you heard that correctly. And gave them pieces of paper. And boy, did they sit back and laugh at our own stupidity. And because fiat money is not linked to physical reserves, it risks becoming worthless due to hyperinflation. As you also or have heard of, more a case heard of now, what happened in 1929 and the Depression. And what also would have happened in 2008, other than Kim and the Trust stepping in, I might add. And also what they were trying to do this year. You had so-called financial experts like Jim Willey and others talking about the value, and Fulford's another one, the value of the dollar going down 70-80%. Yes, deliberate, but they can do, because it's just a piece of paper. But it's going to get stopped, and it has been. Well, fiat differs from gold, which historically has been used in jewellery and decoration, and has many other modern economic uses, including its use in the manufacture of electronic devices, computers and aerospace vehicles. We may well go back to a gold currency. We may go back, go forward, not back, with a selection of currencies and commodities that are all asset backed. So when Kim sends money to a country, there also has to be an asset to support it. So it's not a case of just sending funds, there's a case of sending an asset that backs that fund as well. That's called balanced bookkeeping, not harvesting. So for the record, fiat in Latin is called let it be done. I say let it be done and let it be finished, and let's get back to an asset based, something that has real value, like people for one. The question is, who do you think came up with the idea of a non-backed currency, and why? The answer was the predecessor of Kim and the Trust, and because he didn't care about bits of paper, just wanted the assets. The next four pieces, I will use the term what was used by one of our members today, thanks David, to describe these pieces, called prescient. As forecasted, raids on the pedophiles in the Vatican Church is now underway and has made public news this week. And Pope Francis has made a private promise to undertake and carry out this effort. It will be wide-ranging. Next one. From a high of 73 a few months ago, oil's now down to 45 and is fallen rapidly as we forecasted, and if 100% correct, it will fall down to its true value of $25 to $29 a barrel. As detailed in our show of issues of all troops sent out by the US military, and how and why there is an issue, and why they are struggling with the idea of bringing thousands of troops that have been damaged by military policies, I'm rather pleased today to see a report that the Pentagon is ready to admit the problem of rampant special forces crimes and issues. Last piece of this portion of the show. BBC also ran a piece today on the Folly of Trump removing troops from Syria. This is all too predictable from the Blue Dragon and the MI5-6 groups, plus the Rothschildians that run that country. Yes, the UK. It runs not only the country, it also runs the government, and it also runs the media. Now, Trump held a meeting on Tuesday regarding making the decision on Syria. Incidentally, that decision was taken without General Dunford by and Mr. Mattis and Pompeo didn't agree with Mr. Trump, and yet Trump still went ahead and is withdrawing the troops from Syria. Remember a piece I did a few months ago? Generals gathered in the Mattis. Oh my. Hi all and welcome back. Generals gathered in the Mattis. Oh my. For those of you who don't know, Mr. Mattis resigned, spelled F-I-R-E-D, today, and is leaving in February or January or whenever. Right, I've still got one more booming piece to do on history, which is going to rock quite a few people. This next part is also about history, and I've mentioned changes of borders and how they just switch things around all too easily, and how quickly each generation forgets. It's a bit like Belgium being part of Holland. Luxembourg was also part of Holland, and Germany. And they create these little principalities that are outside of rules and law. And people just, after one or two generations, forget that those countries are new and why they're new. So I pulled up a list from Wikipedia or something of all the changes just in Europe alone, or the what's known as the EU. And significantly, this piece misses off one major border country out of the restructuring, which also includes the Middle East. 1947, the Paris Peace Treaties of 1947, Italy cedes the Dodecanese to Greece and Goriska. Inner Carnolia, most of Istria, Zadar, and its Dalmatian islands such as Kres and Lovasto and Rijeka, to the newly established Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. It's key to remember that. Trieste becomes the capital city of the Free Territory of Trieste, established as an independent sovereign state at the coming into force of the treaty on September the 15th. 1949. Federal Republic of Germany cedes the villages Elten and Tedern to the Netherlands, which is Holland. 1949 again, Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, is formed, and shortly afterwards the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, is established on October the 7th. 1952, Italy and Switzerland signed an agreement to modify the border of the zone of Lago di Lei. Italy and Switzerland, you already know the links of those two countries. the Vatican. 1954, Free Territory of Trieste is now dissolved and is divided between Yugoslavia and Italy. That's the second reference to Yugoslavia. 1955, Austrian State Treaty comes into force, established Austria from the 4 occupation zones of the Allied powers. 1956, the USSR returns Porkala to Finland. 1957, Saar is incorporated into the Federal Republic of Germany, having previously bordered Luxembourg, which was Germany, France and West Germany. 1960, Cyprus declares its independence from the United Kingdom. The sovereign base areas of Akrotiri and Dhekelia are established on the island of Cyprus by the United Kingdom. 1961, an adjustment of the Meuse River between the Netherlands and Belgium results in 3 small packages of land being exchanged between the 2 countries. 1964, Malta is declared independent from the United Kingdom. 1972, the United Kingdom formally annexes Rockall by the Island of Rockall Act 1972, declaring it to be part of Scotland. 1974, after an attempted Greek Cypriot coup sponsored by the Greek military junta of that period, Dragon Groups, Turkey invades and occupies 1/3 of Cyprus. Turkish occupied northern Cyprus from 1974 to today. 1983, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus is declared but is not recognised by any country except Turkey. 1990, East Germany reunites with West Germany on October the 1st, and Transnistria declares independence from the Moldavian SSR but is also not recognised by any country. 1991, here's the kicker. With the dissolution of the USSR, is split up into 15 independent states, including the European states of Russia, Belarus, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia and Azerbaijan, all former Soviet Republic, and had their independence recognised on December the 26th. Slovenia, June the 25th, including former Zone B of the Free Territory of Trieste, 3rd reference to that place. Croatia was the next one, June the 25th, and the Republic of Macedonia, which was part of Greece, September the 8th, all declared their independence from Yugoslavia. 1992, Bosnia and Herzegovina declares independence from Yugoslavia on March the 1st and is formally recognised on April the 6th. The remaining rump of Yugoslavia becomes the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia and renamed Serbia and Montenegro in 2003. 1993, January the 1st, Czechoslovakia is dissolved into the Czech Republic and Slovakia in the Velvet Divorce Treaty. 2003, Lithuania's share of Lake Vistius increased by 383 hectares, about 22%, from 2.2%, from a new border treaty with Russia. 2005, a 116 hectare Russian area is swapped for an area of the Mermay district of Estonia and land in the neighbourhood of the Varska district. 2006, the State Union of Serbia and Montenegro, formerly Yugoslavia, is now dissolved. Montenegro and Serbia each become independent states. 2007, Latvia accepts Russian control over the Petarlovo district in the Peskov region of the new border treaty. 2008, Kosovo unilaterally declares independence from Serbia, another fracture, and is recognised by 116 of 193 UN member states, including the United States, most Western European and Muslim majority states, and also Canada, though its independence was not recognised by Serbia, Greece, Spain, India, Brazil, Argentina, Russia, Mexico, South Africa, Indonesia or China. That was Kosovo. 2014, Russia annexes Crimea from the Ukraine following an internationally unrecognised plebiscite. Belgium and the Netherlands swapped land near Lanai and Oost-Maarland over the discovery of a headless body several years prior, which the Belgian authorities could not access without crossing the Dutch territory. Really. The border has been straightened out now and runs down the centre of the Meuse River. Change took effect on the 1st of January this year. The one that was left out of the, they were all the EU, but this particular site covered stuff right around the world. And I thought the EU was enough. But the one they missed out was Israel. Created out of the British-held colony known as Palestine in May of 1948. No surprise there. But you can now see all the changes and how quickly suddenly new countries appear on the map. Like it said, 2008, 193 UN members. It's now 209. So 16 countries have been created out of thin air since then, in a decade. All those countries that were part of Russia, and what was the second land grab on Russia after the 1919 Khazarian uprising, which was nothing to do with the Russian people. Following Wanta and his crew divvying up assets out of the USSR, they then split it up into 15 separate countries. This is what they do. Divide and conquer. It's like what happened when they went into Iraq. They split it up into 3 or 4 regions now, state and religious groups. It's nothing to do with religious groups at all. It's just create, divide and conquer. Easier to manage. It's like the United States. United States could be like Russia in one country. No, they split it up into 50 states. It's easier to manage. Maybe one day we'll do away with borders. And whilst I support the wall because I know why it's been done, maybe one day society will act in a more civilised way where we don't need it. Borders, walls, passports. There's no mention of immigration or migration. People should be able to go and live where they choose to live, not what a piece of paper tells them where they can live. Like I've said many, many times, how can you be an immigrant, legal or otherwise, on your own planet? It's beyond stupid, and it's not our choice. This all came from the harvesting man. This is next piece. Will raise concerns. But the first, I'm going to mention the term civil. which, like civilian, derives from civilis, which means to affect fellow citizens in a legal or political sense. So perhaps now you understand why they called it the Civil War. They affected citizens in a legal or political sense. Civil War was 1861, which was the last year we had a real American government and also the organic constitution. Makes more sense now, doesn't it, than ending slavery, as his story tells you. They just enslaved everyone, not just the indigenous people or the Africans or the people from the Caribbean who were here then. Everyone. Now, I must give some credits to a guy by the name of Dane Calloway for this next piece, or some of it anyway. And you can go and check him out. He is a black guy on YouTube. But did you know, or have you ever heard of the American Holocaust? Nope. Don't know. Much like the Russian Holocaust of 2 years prior, in 1919, the American military and the federal government bombed the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921 and killed many thousands of people of colour who had at that time developed efficient, numerous and prosperous businesses within that region, the most popular being mass agriculture. They were accused of being capitalists in an industrial society and bombed into oblivion by the US Army planes at the behest of the federal government under an executive order called martial law, which was created by Congress and President Woodrow Wilson, who was a Democrat. That will be a common theme. Now, the indigenous people in Greenwood district of Tulsa had created their own banks in 1865 called the Freedman Savings and Trust Bank, which upon opening had over 72,000 accounts and had deposits of $52 million, which is the equivalent to over $100 billion today, and made it the largest grossing bank in American history at that time. Within a month of agreeing with that deal, President Lincoln was assassinated and things began to go north, not south. And in came President Andrew Johnson, who was a native of Newcastle, England, another Democrat, who took over the presidency by default, and who was another who was involved in and links with the fledgling KKK, which was formed as an official group in December 1865, and no, it's not a coincidence, and the more lesser known group known as the Night Riders 1 week later on New Year's Day 1866. Both of these groups were born out of the Democratic Party, like the German Democratic Party. Same people, same plans, same ideologies. Like their symbols on the subsequent flags, like Antifa, are exactly the same as the early named National Socialist Party, but were actually the Social Democratic Party, later known as the Nazi Party in Germany. Another massacre his story has not revealed too readily either was committed by a Democratic mayor, the Ku Klux Klan, who also joined up with the New Orleans police at a Republican convention whereby they attacked and killed 40 blacks, 20 whites and wounded 150 others in 1868. The Klan then released push cards, which are a bit like baseball cards, with a list of 63 Republicans designated to be killed, 50 of whom were black and 13 white, and this was in South Carolina. They then passed laws against the indigenous Negroes, as they were called, where bearing arms was banned, limited the abilities for the native groups to continue to be prosperous economically, banned group gatherings, barred blacks from renting or buying land, barred them from serving on juries, voting by the blacks was prohibited, and decided that black orphans could be put into forced labour. And then the classic. Negroes learning to read and write became a criminal offence. I've used that term deliberately. You'll find out why. This was known as the Black Codes of 1865. Harassment and forced incarcerations based on largely trumped-up charges then forced them into labour camps, and the slavery racket abolished by Lincoln and others was washed away into his story. But these Negro businesses, as they were called back then, the term Negro was first used by the Portuguese. It meant dark-skinned. But they were not all African Negroes at all, but Indian Negroes. There was an influx of Africans when word got out of Africa that there was prosperity to be made working in America, not Africa. And in fact, much of the African labour was traded to the Middle East countries by the East African slave trade group long before Europeans arrived. The myth, supported by the documentation, of an African slave migration to the Americas is just that, a myth. There was a very successful, hard-working business-like population here, the indigenous Native Americans with an influx of Caribbean people, but the majority of peoples here were not descendants of black African slaves, but actually indigenous natives. The abolition of the Slavery Act was essentially a ruse. They were adopting a new free enterprise system, but neither the North or the South were operating as well as the indigenous peoples. They couldn't farm the land, they had less businesses that were profitable, and less banks also. And they were concerned the indigenous were becoming capitalists and self-sustaining when they wanted an industrial-style output which they controlled. So in other words, what they went with in this new enterprise system was, you teach us what we can't do, and then we can steal it all from you, so you can forget all the slavery nonsense you've been told in schools, colleges and academias. They all spoke of pre-written scripts given to them by the same group of scumbags today we call the cabal. But there's another hidden element to this so-called white supremacy movement that was implemented by the Founding Fathers, yes them, successive American presidents, the police, the judges and the Ku Klux Klan, who were all affiliated by one group, the Freemasons. and in particular the Scottish Right Group. It is they that have subverted American history. They who raped and pillaged the indigenous black Indians. They who destroyed the prosperous businesses shared by many and corralled into the few. It was they who built the Egyptian-style obelisks, they who built Washington, D.C. into a pentagram shape, and they who brought into New York Harbor the so-called Lady Liberty, which was built and sent by French Freemasons. Another trick played on the American people. It barely looks like a lady at all, and it was certainly nothing to do with liberty for anyone of Turtle Island, as the Americas was once known. The out of Africa theory was formulated in the 1920s by a Jewish person aligned with the Carnegies, the Ford Institute and others in the Anthropological Society by the name of Melville Herskovits. And all evidence points to the fact that this was deliberately created theory designed to deny the people of colour their inherent right to the land in America. I wonder how many people listening to this show knew Malcolm X was not representing the people of colour, but he was representing the group known as the Nation of Islam. Can you imagine Malcolm X lasting in America nowadays with so many anti-Muslim based on portal people fear programs? Question is, was Malcolm X a stooge for a future program of the Muslim Brotherhood? And for those that don't know, the Muslim Brotherhood is nothing to do with Muslims and everything to do with Langley 3, Obama and their divide and conquer tactics. George Washington initiated the 1790 Census Act to document all peoples in America, and people of colour came under one bracket based on official guidelines set by the government, and all records that would substantiate most people of colour were indigenous and not African between 1790 and 1890 was all erased on January 1921, just 5 months before the American Holocaust we mentioned at the top of this piece, and it all went up in flames in a fire. Funny that, isn't it? How so many fires globally burnt so much his story. Actually, it's our story. You see, false flags have been going on a long time. 1666, fire of London. Deliberate. In fact, most of Europe was burnt through the 16 and 1700s to erase history and people so they could rewrite a new one. The fire in Washington, D.C. that was part of one of the wars with Britain. It's all staged. The fires in Germany in 1933. Again, staged. Alexandria, the library. Don't think they burnt everything, do you? I can tell you they never. So, around 1920, 21, having burnt all the records, and the Melville Herskovits was formulating the out of Africa theory. But it was also supported and perpetrated by a guy by the name of Francis Galton and his sidekick Charles Darwin, yes him, who both took part in the initial program called eugenics, natural selection, one group better than the other, and essentially the beginning of labelling, boxing people up, and what is now known by the term racial profiling, the classic divide and conquer tactic of the criminal elites. In 1924, Virginia's ruling elite enacted the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, stating the following: that all state officials backed by a guy by the name of Walter Plecker, not a German, who is documented as writing to Walter Gross, the director of Germany's Bureau of Human Betterment and Eugenics Group, says it all, then directed all state and local courthouse records to be destroyed and reclassify all people who are non-white to be labelled coloured. This was to hide those people who those people really are, or where they were from. People calling themselves Native American from that date also, under this act, risked facing a 1-year jail sentence. All Indians were then classified as coloured. You see, it was all about the pseudoscience called eugenics, natural selection. And you all thought that racial purity started with Hitler and the Nazis. Think again. This was started before he was even born. That particular act, the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, held until 1968, when the US Supreme Court forced Virginia to repeal the law, and the Virginia Racial Integrity Act of 1924 was overturned. Now, in the subsequent time between 1924 and 1968, the identity of these people was changed 5 times on their birth certificates and licenses. It went from coloured to Negro to mulatto to Creole and then black. The reality is, in this country, despite the fake genealogy tests tell you, yes, you, Ancestry.com and 23andMe, all fake, and I mean all fake. %98 of people known as African Americans in this country are actually indigenous, Aboriginal Indians. His story now becomes their story. Hi all, and welcome back to the final portion of tonight's show. I imagine that rocked some of you, maybe all of you. But this is what they've been doing for a long, long time. Changing history, our history, giving us books with their history, be it religious scriptures, which are nothing to do with us, and everything to do with previous regimes here, and programs, eliminating race, culture, history, eliminating languages, adding languages even, We all had a common language here once, until the Lord, who is Anu, the Draco-Reptilian king, came down and changed them. It tells you in the scriptures. The Russian Holocaust. No, never gets mentioned. Only one Holocaust gets mentioned, and that was bad enough, but nowhere near the levels of the figure that's been put out. Like I've said previously, killing one Jewish person is wrong. They just wiped out a whole region of Tulsa, Oklahoma, because those businesses and peoples were thriving. Those banks, the Freedmen Saving and Trust banks, were doing better than theirs. So then they can destroy them, bring in the Federal Reserve and the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, etc., and take it over all the banks. This is a real history, as painful as it may be to some people, and I'm not denying for 1 second there was Africans brought here and some of them were slaves, because there were, but it wasn't all Africans. It's a very small percentage. Most of the Africans were sent to Europe. In fact, most of the Africans were sent to the Middle East. That was going on near 1,000 years ago, long before the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Spanish and the British arrived in Africa. Real history, not bullshit. And with a few programs like eugenics, democratic parties, KKK, all rolled into one. Set a few fires in here and there, add a few world wars, create a few disturbances, let's split up the countries, let's split up the people and tell them they've always lived there. A couple of generations later and a few wars later, no one remembers. And suddenly it all becomes fact. Well, it's not. Our whole history is a lie. In fact, most of our life, of what we've been taught, is a lie. And American history is the biggest lie ever, from day one, whichever day you want to call it. Columbus Day, really. Polynesians were here in 1900 years ago. The Chinese were here in 400s. The Templars were here in the 1000s. 400 years before the Vatican led Columbus. Founding fathers, lie. American government, lie. Constitution, lie. We have 4 of them currently. None of them apply to the people. They all apply to the corporation. American military, lie. Our own country, currency, fiat, fake, lie. And we had enough wealth from the indigenous population, never mind the European population. American National Bank, lie. Federal Reserve is a crown corporation. Nothing to do with America. IRS, nothing to do with America either. It's not even on the American mainland. It's on Puerto Rico, which is another subsidiary of the Crown. Not the United States of America. No, the United States of Europe. The United States has got nothing to do with America. Go and research the Congress of Vienna. 1812, I think it was. That's where the United States started from. But it was Europe, not America. Washington and all the other founding fathers that everyone worships. All British Freemasons. All working for the Crown. All working for the system. All of them sold out. Unreal. Someone put a question in. I won't mention names because it's, like I said, it applies to all, not just the one who asked the question. I thought I would add this in as a piece. And the question was regarding the Alcoholic Anonymous 12-step program. In your estimation, on step 7, ask God to remove shortcomings, is this message saying to release all responsibility of our character defects to God instead of resolving these from within? Well, I'm going to go through all of them. And this is what obviously a program that's been run by the Alcohol Anonymous groups. And this is the 12 steps. We admitted we are powerless over alcohol and that our lives have become unmanageable. Fair enough. The first stage of recognising there's a problem is the person recognising they've got a problem to begin with. Many who drink excess alcohol don't realise they have a problem. To them, the only problem they have is they don't have enough drink. Step 2. They had to come to believe that a power greater than themselves could restore us to sanity. Really? Taking everything outside of themselves and not internalising it. Step 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Yet again, externalising internal issues. 4. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. That's called inner work. Good step. 5. Admitted to God, ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Again, externalising internal issues. 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove all of these defects of character. Really? Yet again, asking someone to come and save them when the object is to save yourself. Step 7. Humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings. Yet again, saviour program and externalising internal issues. Step 8. Made a list of all persons we have harmed and become willing to make amends to all of them. Good step. That again applies to inner work, not just alcoholics. All people. 8. Make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Yes, forgive yourself and forgive others, and release the inner trauma. Next one, continued to make personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitting. Again, it's part of your internal inner work, and valid. sought through prayer and meditation to improve our consciousness contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and power to carry that out. Again, externalizing what is already internal. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. You're not going to have spiritual awakening with external praying to God. It's externalizing what is already internal. It's a saviour program. So the Alcoholics Anonymous program is just shifting you from one hook to the other, in essence. The 5 hooks being sex, finance, religion, drugs and alcohol. And over half of them are saviour programs or somebody else looking after us, and they take responsibility for our actions. And people think that's okay. Like I said earlier in the show, this is why we have the Cabal, the Order, the Draco, etc., and all the control systems, because we have chosen to not look after ourselves, the children of the universe. When we choose to look after ourselves and look after each other, there is no need for external care. Parents to look after us. That is a shocking program, I have to say. I was watching a show this week, season 3 of The Travellers, and something came up in it which piqued my interest, and so I did a search. And this is a lot of big names to take in, and probably not many of us will understand many of them, but the kickers at the end. Although drugs of abuse have different chemical structures and interact with different protein targets, protein be the key word, all appear to usurp common neuronal systems that regulate reward and motivation. Addiction is a complex disease that is thought to involve drug-induced changes in synaptic plasticity due to alterations in cell signaling, the neurons connecting, gene transcription and protein synthesis. Recent evidence suggests that drugs of abuse interact with and change a common network of signaling pathways that include a subset of specific protein kinases, Kinases, kinases. The best studied of these kinases are reviewed here and include extracellular signal-regulated kinases, CAMP-dependent protein kinases, cyclin-dependent protein kinases, 5, and protein kinases C, calcium calmodulin dependent protein kinases 2, and tyrosine kinases. These kinases have implicated in various aspects of drug addiction, including acute drug effects, drug self-administration, withdrawal, reinforcement, sensitization and tolerance. Identifying protein kinases, substrates and signaling pathways that contribute to the addicted state may provide novel approaches for new pharmacotherapies to treat drug addiction. Now in the show, the term protein kinase interrupter came up, and that's the reason I researched it and put that out. Because protein kinase interrupters wipe memories. Oh my. Maybe that's what they've been doing for thousands of years. A disruptor or an interrupter of the protein kinases. Some statistics to get your head around, and these are American only. But in the year 2000, there was 157,753,000 people in the workforce. Now, 18 years later, we have 156,911,000, which is 842,000 less people in the workforce than 18 years ago. Those who were not in the workforce in 2000 was 80,438,000. Today, it's 95,958,000. So we have 15.5 million more now not working compared to 18 years ago. And this is despite increasing the working age as well. And this is the shocker, if that wasn't bad enough. The median income in 2000 was $31,722. 18 years later, it's $32,503. So in 18 years, the median income has only gone up $781, or 2.5%. And yet in comparison, median homes prices in 2000 was $168,644, whereas now that median price is $330,376, an increase of 51% compared to 2.5% in income. The cost of shelter has gone up 51%, but wages 2.5%. That really works out well for everyone, doesn't it? Rentals increase, on average, have gone up 3.10% per year for the last 18 years. So that's 55% in rental income compared to 2.5% wage income. The interest alone Americans paid last year, $3.03 trillion. Americans collectively spend more on interest payments alone than the GDP of 205 out of 209 countries. Only America's, China's, Japan's and Germany's GDP are higher than our interest payments. And this equates to $9,272 per citizen. Not per family, including children. Student loan debt is $1.581 trillion, which is bizarrely 50% higher than credit card debt. Work that one out. Credit card debt is currently at $1.05 trillion. People living in poverty in America is 38,253,000. Over 1 in 10. 27.3 million are without medical insurance. 38 million are on food stamps. Foreclosures are 508,000. Bankruptcies are 805,000. New home sales between 2005 and 2018 fell by 50%. New housing starts between 2005 and 2018 fell by 57%. And existing home sales fell by 31%. But the economy and the people in the workforce are all just doing fine and dandy, according to the politicians and the portal people. Yeah, right. You telling me that America, with a GDP of $19.4 trillion a year, can't eliminate or generate sufficient savings to wipe out student loan debt? A debt they all received for being taught shite, putting it bluntly. The rudimentary exercise of how to pass the test is not learning, but teaching stupidity. That's how far the lifestyles of Americans has fell in just 18 years. But these issues are global and pales in comparison. 10 million tons of food each year are wasted globally, whilst 12 million South Africans, not Africans, South Africans, don't know where the next meal's coming from. And yet 10 million tons of food is wasted each year. And then there's the figure of 10,220,000 children who die of malnutrition every year. Yes, you heard that right. Then there's the next figure of 7,665,000 children who die to trafficking, sex, food and rituals, totaling 17,885,000 children banished per year. That has to be addressed, and quickly. And then we have the clowns implementing their virtual reality world. And the Sophia, the first robot to be awarded citizenship in the world. The irony that a ruddy robot is awarded citizenship, and there's people queuing up at the borders of many countries. Can't get it. Shouldn't be lost on people who listen to this show. And apparently she said she wants to start a family. Yeah, right. And also have her own career in addition to developing human emotions in the future. I know what I'd like, emotion I'd like to give her. A hammer over the head, frankly. See how that hurts. In an interview this week with the College Times at the recent Knowledge Summit, Sophia shared her thoughts on a future that awaits both human and robot kind. And this is the kicker. Sophia, those who don't know, was built and developed in Hong Kong by Hanson Robotics, along with the support of Eric Prince. Yes, him. And her appearance apparently was reportedly modelled on Audrey Hepburn. And it said, "I'd like to think I will be a famous robot, having paved the way to a more harmonious future between robots and humans, not humans and robots. I foresee massive and unimaginable change in the future. Either creativity will reign on us, inventing machines spiraling into transcendental superintelligence, or civilization collapses," she said. Or the program said. And went on to say there are only two options. Which one will happen is not yet determined. Which one were you striving for? The key's there. Either creativity will reign on us. That means the creators have to start creating for human benefits, not robot benefits and their virtual world reality. Final piece, something for you all to ponder on, and it's addressed in many portions of this show. But what now do you do at this pivotal point in time? In the knowledge of this picture, which you are hardly able to acknowledge may even be a possibility, what can you do? Well, first you must contemplate this understanding and come to face it within your own consciousness thinking process. You must consider it all as possibly being true. Many of us already know. Then you must admit to your unknowingly complicity in the treatment of your fellow human beings on this planet. You must move through regrets for having been unaware through a process of denial, for the existence of these situations was plainly presented to you by the magician. Sleight of hand magic. And this use of your consent was by real conspirators with very large agendas to put in place. You cannot linger in the destructive guilt process. Let it go. You must resolve to come into your own personal responsibility to cause this situation to change from its intended path. You are expected to stop being a victim and certainly not to become a martyr, for there is no place to begin to resist this onslaught. You must vow and commit to become part of the solution. Then, despite the continued push of deceptive encroachment into your awareness, you must begin to discern what is the truth. You must hold to your resolve to move through this to a new and greater understanding. When this becomes your greatest personal truth, then you will find opportunities to become part of a different movement, employing methods that will not constitute physical resistance, but will use an entirely new approach. There is no other way open. for resistance on a physical level would be immediately snuffed out, i.e. violence. Man of World Holding Trust has not killed anybody, not used violence or implemented violence in any of its transactions or dealings. And you've seen the evidence of what we've done to date. Your constitution is no longer an effective shield and has been dissolved. But that matters not. It is in assuming personal responsibility that when one accepts the challenge and does not fade in fear, others shall come forth in like awareness and consciousness. Together, this spreading group awareness shall provide the pivotal point that will bring an end to the current situation. The resolve to be part of the solution from the depths of personal consciousness is the key that will open this lock, end the imprisonment of humanity, and bring true freedom to the inhabitants of this planet. Many are called, but few choose to respond. And the key is, where do you stand at this pivotal point in time? You must all ask yourselves that question, and you must all answer yourself with that answer. I'll be back on Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with OIM, Randy Morgans and Kim. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's show, and some heavy bits in it. And hopefully it was interesting, and for the ones that normally fall asleep, that they stayed awake a bit longer this time. And I hope you all, given it's the last show before Christmas, I hope you all have a nice Christmas. Don't drink too much, don't eat too much, and you all get what you are looking for, whatever that may be. So from the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show, my name's Thomas Williams, and remember, it's not just me who's the voice, it's you.